Have you ever felt someone's pain so deeply you forgot your own? You saw her struggle, her wounds, her trauma, her chaos, and without thinking, you stepped in, not because she asked, but because you couldn't stand to see her suffer. And in that moment, you gave her something rare, your energy, your attention, your essence. And what did she give you in return? A broken compass, a moving target, a test you were never meant to pass, Jung tried to warn us. He said, the man who does not become conscious of his own darkness will project his soul onto others and be devoured by the illusion that he can save them. That's the trap of the empath. The man who feels too much, loves too hard, and loses himself without ever realizing he's bleeding out because, here's the brutal truth no one wants to say, empaths are the easiest men to use. They're loyal even when they're punished. They're generous even when they're drained. They're understanding even when they're being disrespected. And in today's world, where validation is currency and attention is control, women have evolved to sense this man, to test him, to break him, to drain him. Not out of evil, but because his silence tells her, I will give you everything, just don't leave. Just don't leave, Marco, because this truth might finally set you free. This video is your awakening. If you've ever felt like your kindness became a weapon used against you, if you've ever watched yourself disappear while trying to heal someone else, then listen carefully, because Carl Jung left behind a roadmap for every man who's been emotionally hijacked, spiritually exploited, and turned into a servant wearing the mask of a savior. And by the end of this video, you'll know why the empathic man suffers most and how to never let it happen again. Carl Jung believed that what we do not make conscious will return as fate. And for empaths, especially men, that fate often shows up as a woman. Not just any woman, but the one who seems broken in all the right ways, the one who needs saving, the one who reflects every hidden wound he's never dared to face. You see, the empathic man isn't just sensitive, he's subconsciously seeking suffering. Why? Because deep down, his identity was built around being needed, being useful, being the one who could hold space when no one else would. And that's not compassion, that's trauma wearing a noble mask. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's why the empath keeps ending up in relationships where he's the therapist, the fixer, the emotional sponge. He doesn't attract chaos, he subconsciously craves it. Because in that chaos, he finds a familiar role. Caretaker, savior, martyr. Think about it. When was the first time you felt valued? When was the first time someone truly needed you? For most empathic men, it wasn't when they were celebrated for their strength. It was when they became indispensable through their service. When they learned that love was earned through sacrifice, that acceptance came through usefulness, that belonging required them to disappear into someone else's storm. And let's be brutally honest, many women know this dynamic, not consciously, but instinctively. They sense the man who can't say no, the man who wants to be chosen so badly, he'll carry emotional weight that isn't his. So they give him just enough praise to keep him hooked, just enough affection to keep him hopeful, but never enough truth to set him free. And he keeps returning. Why? Because every time she cries, he feels alive. Every time she pulls away, he tries harder, and every time she gives him just a glimpse of love, he believes it's real. But here's the Jungian bombshell. The empathic man is not falling for her. He's falling for his own unconscious wounds projected onto her. He thinks he's being kind. He thinks he's helping. But in truth, he's avoiding himself. Because as long as he's focused on her problems, he never has to look at his own. He never has to face the boy inside who was taught that love must be earned through sacrifice. Jung called this the anima possession. When a man's inner feminine isn't integrated, it hijacks his identity. He becomes soft in all the wrong ways, overgiving, over-understanding, overexposed. He believes that empathy equals virtue. But Jung would say, no, empathy without boundaries is self-destruction. Because when your heart is wide open, but your spine is made of paper, you don't attract love, you attract users. The anima, Jung's term for the feminine aspect within every man, is meant to be a bridge to understanding, creativity, and emotional depth. But when it possesses the ego, it becomes a tyrant. The man loses his center. He starts interpreting reality through emotions rather than consciousness. He believes that feeling everything deeply makes him evolved, enlightened, superior to those closed-off men who seem heartless. But what he doesn't realize is that those heartless men often have something he lacks: the ability to feel without drowning, the capacity to care without collapsing, the strength to love without losing themselves in the process. And in today's dating world full of emotional games, attention economies, and spiritual manipulation, the empath is a target, not because he's weak, but because he thinks his suffering is noble. So he stays, he tolerates, he endures, and one day he wakes up wondering where his fire went, why he feels invisible, why he feels used. The answer, because he was, until the empathic man owns his shadow, until he realizes that his urge to save is often just an escape from himself, he will never know true love, only its illusion. Carl Jung warned us about the shadow, the hidden, denied parts of the psyche. But what happens when his shadow meets hers? You get the perfect storm, the empathic man and the emotionally fractured woman. On the surface, it looks like love, but underneath, it's a psychological battlefield. And only one of them walks away whole. Here's what most men don't understand. Every woman has a shadow too. A part of her that manipulates, withdraws, tests, and feeds off validation, especially from a man who won't walk away. And the empath, he senses this. But instead of confronting it, he romanticizes it. Oh, she's just hurt. She's not toxic. She's misunderstood. If I just love her harder, she'll change. But Jung would say, no, she won't. Not if your love is unconscious, because what the empath calls devotion is often just a trauma loop. He's not healing her, he's enabling her shadow and feeding his own. The empath's shadow contains all the parts of himself he's disowned in service of being good. His anger, his selfishness, his need for recognition, his hunger for power, his capacity for cruelty, all buried beneath layers of spiritual bypassing and people-pleasing. But these parts don't disappear. They get projected onto others or expressed through passive-aggressive martyrdom. Meanwhile, her shadow, her capacity for manipulation, her need to control through chaos, her addiction to drama, feeds off his unconscious guilt. She doesn't respect his goodness because it doesn't feel real. It feels performative, like a man trying to earn love rather than command it. It becomes a dangerous dance. She pulls away, he leans in. She lashes out. He apologizes. She withholds affection. He tries harder. Every step confirms a hidden belief: I have to suffer to be loved. And guess what? She doesn't respect him, not because he's kind, but because he's predictable. Because every time she tests him, he folds. Every time she withdraws, he panics. Every time she gets cold, he bleeds warmth to win her back. Jung called this anima inflation. When a man is ruled by the distorted feminine within, he becomes emotionally porous. He feels everything except his own center. He starts to see her emotions as gospel, her moods as scripture, and worst of all, her validation as his oxygen. This is where the empathic man becomes dangerous, not to others, but to himself. He inflates his identity around his sensitivity. He believes his emotional reactivity makes him more evolved than other men. He wears his wounds like badges of honor, his trauma like credentials of authenticity. But Jung understood that this inflation is just another form of unconsciousness. The man who identifies with being the sensitive one is as asleep as the man who identifies with being the tough one. Both are playing roles. Both are avoiding the deeper work of integration. The empathic man often surrounds himself with people who confirm his victim narrative, other empaths who validate his suffering, wounded women who appreciate his understanding, spiritual communities that celebrate his openness. But none of them challenge him to grow beyond his comfortable cage of perpetual hurt. This is why so many modern men burn out, not from war, not from work, from women they couldn't say no to because they mistook access for intimacy. They thought being open was enough. They believed that empathy alone would protect them. But Jung would ask, empathy for who? Her or your own abandoned self? Because that's the deeper tragedy. The empathic man is often so focused on soothing her inner child that he abandons his own. And that's where the collapse begins. He becomes drained, he loses his spark, he doesn't recognize his own face in the mirror, and when she finally leaves, not with malice but indifference, he's left with a silence so loud it feels like death. But that silence, that is the beginning, because in that collapse, the man has two choices: blame her and repeat the cycle, or look inward and reclaim his sovereignty. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And for the empathic man, that darkness begins with this realization: you were never saving her, you were sacrificing yourself to avoid saving you. There's something cruelly ironic about the empath's journey. He spends his life trying to avoid pain only to attract the very women who cause it. But Jung helps us understand why. See, the empathic man isn't just emotionally open, he's emotionally exposed. His compassion isn't rooted in strength, it's rooted in a deep, unconscious wound. And what do women sense better than anything else? Weakness masquerading as virtue. This is what makes the empath so vulnerable in love. He leads with his softness, he wears his heart on his sleeve, he believes love means understanding her pain more than protecting his own boundaries. But Jung warned us, what you don't make conscious will control you, and you'll call it fate. She walks into his life, beautiful and broken, unpredictable and magnetic. She says all the right things and does all the opposite ones. She gets close, then cold, warm, then silent. 1 minute she's fragile, the next she's a storm. And he calls it passion, but what it really is his unhealed mother wound playing itself out through romance. He's not loving a woman, he's chasing the approval of a past he never processed. The mother wound in men runs deeper than most realize. It's not just about having a bad mother. It's about never learning to separate love from sacrifice, care from control, intimacy from enmeshment. The empathic man often grew up feeling responsible for his mother's emotional state. He learned to read her moods like weather patterns, to adjust his behavior to maintain peace, to believe that his worth was measured by her emotional stability. And this pattern follows him into adulthood. He seeks women who trigger that familiar dynamic, women whose emotional states become his responsibility, whose chaos becomes his mission, whose healing becomes his identity. And women feel this. Even the most well-meaning woman will test the empath, not out of evil, not even consciously, but because something inside her needs to feel the presence of a man she can't control. And when the empath fails that test, when he chases, explains, apologizes, or collapses, her instincts scream, he's not the one. And the worst part, she doesn't even know why. That's the torment of the empath. He gives everything and is never enough. He listens, he forgives, he absorbs her storms like a sponge, and she still walks away because what she wanted wasn't a sponge, it was a mirror that reflects strength, boundaries, and identity, not one that morphs into her chaos called this projection. And women unconsciously project their inner instability onto men they sense can't withstand it. In other words, if you can't hold your own frame, she'll break it. Not to be cruel, but to see if you have one. This testing isn't malicious, it's biological. At the deepest level, women are wired to seek men who can remain stable in the face of emotional storms. Not men who join the storm, but men who can weather it without losing themselves. It's an ancient survival mechanism that modern dating has perverted into psychological warfare. The empath, however, interprets her testing as a cry for help. When she becomes unreasonable, he tries to reason with her. When she becomes distant, he pursues. When she becomes cruel, he becomes kinder. He believes he's demonstrating love, but what he's actually demonstrating is his inability to hold boundaries under pressure. And most empathic men, They don't. They think love means dissolving. But real love, the kind that commands respect, means remaining whole. Because here's the truth no one tells empaths. Your gift is not your sensitivity. It's your ability to stay rooted in the face of emotional chaos. If you give that up, if you leak your center trying to prove your love, she won't feel safe. She'll feel unled, and so she'll leave confused and unsatisfied, not because you weren't enough, but because you never stood your ground long enough to become unforgettable. Have you ever looked at a man and seen a ghost? Not the kind that haunts houses, but the kind that haunts himself. The empath often becomes this ghost, not because he's weak, but because he's over-identified with emotion. CarlJung had a word for this: possession. When a man is possessed by an emotional pattern, he doesn't understand, he doesn't feel feelings. He becomes consumed by them. The possessed man loses his observing ego, the part of consciousness that can witness experience without being overtaken by it. Instead of saying, I feel sad, he becomes sadness. Instead of saying, I sense her pain, he becomes her pain. He loses the crucial distance between self and experience that allows for wisdom, discernment, and choice. And here's where the trap tightens. Empathic men don't just feel their own pain, they feel hers too. And his instincts tell him that absorbing her emotions is an act of love. But Jung would say, the man who cannot separate his feelings from the world around him is not compassionate, he is lost. Why? Because when you become her sadness, her anger, her chaos, you are no longer a man. You are a container, a vessel for her shadow to pour into. This possession shows up in countless ways. The empath finds himself saying things he doesn't mean to keep the peace. He changes his opinions to match her moods. He abandons his friends, his hobbies, his dreams to accommodate her needs. He becomes a shapeshifter, morphing into whatever form he believes will earn her love. But what he doesn't realize is that this shape-shifting is exactly what repels her. She doesn't want a man who agrees with everything she says. She wants a man with his own thoughts. She doesn't want someone who absorbs her chaos. She wants someone who can transform it. She doesn't want a reflection of her emotions. She wants a grounding force that helps her find her center. So, what's the way out? How does the empathic man break free from this cycle of possession and projection? Jung's answer was integration, the conscious embrace of the shadow. For the empath, this means acknowledging the parts of himself he's disowned in service of being good. His anger, not the passive-aggressive resentment that builds up from years of people-pleasing, but the clean anger that protects his boundaries. His selfishness, not the narcissistic kind that exploits others, but the healthy selfishness that says, my needs matter too. His capacity for cruelty, not sadism, but the willingness to say hard truths that might hurt someone's feelings if those truths serve their growth. His need for recognition, not the desperate hunger for validation, but the natural desire to be seen and appreciated for who he truly is. When the empath integrates these shadow elements, something profound happens. His compassion becomes grounded in strength rather than weakness. His empathy becomes a choice rather than a compulsion. His love becomes an offering rather than a desperate plea. And women feel this integration immediately. They sense the man who can hold space without losing himself, who can be kind without being weak, who can care without becoming consumed. This integrated man doesn't avoid difficult women. He transforms them through his presence. Not by trying to fix them, but by remaining so rooted in his own truth that his stability becomes contagious. Drop a comment below if you felt this in your soul. Your story matters, and we read every word. Psych Vision is listening. The tragedy of the modern empathic man is that he's forgotten his true power. He thinks his gift is feeling everything, but his real gift is remaining centered while feeling everything. He thinks his purpose is to absorb pain, but his real purpose is to transmute it. Carl Jung understood that the most powerful men aren't those who deny their sensitivity, they're those who master it, who can dive deep into the emotional realm and return with wisdom rather than wounds, who can love without losing themselves in the process. This is the empathic man's ultimate test. Can you feel her pain without becoming it? Can you witness her chaos without joining it? Can you love her shadow without being devoured by it? If the answer is yes, then you've found your way home, not to her, but to yourself. And in finding yourself, you become the man who doesn't chase love, love chases him. Because that's the secret Jung was trying to tell us. The man who has integrated his shadow doesn't need to be completed by anyone else. He's already whole. And wholeness, real grounded conscious wholeness, is the most attractive force in the universe. So the question isn't whether you're sensitive enough to love her. The question is whether you're strong enough to love yourself first. That's where your real journey begins.